Allowing Your Ideas to Be. This is Conversation 3 with Ian Norseworthy. He's an artist and a producer, and we talk about the pursuit of your passions and finding the joy in the process. Welcome. Hi Ian, how you doing?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Yourself? Thank you for having
I'm really looking forward to it. So my question is, if you had space to talk about anything today, what would it be?
Oh, yeah, that's good. I mean, I guess it's like different avenues of personal growth. I think I'm very much a believer in, and obviously appreciate time can be a factor, but not necessarily confining yourself to just the one thing that you're doing. Like, so, I think there's always opportunities to kind of grow in multiple ways. So to kind of do things alongside your main thing if you have time, or explore different kind of avenues. Not necessarily complaint, but a common theme that I hear from people quite a lot is you do your job, you try and advance in your job, but maybe you don't always get the chance to do either what you're passionate about, or perhaps you don't get a chance to, you feel not necessarily in a box, but maybe you feel a little bit like you don't get the chance to learn other things. And I think it's nice to kind of open that up and go, well, there's opportunities even in small sections to learn other things. And that can be super exciting as well to keep yourself sharp and passionate.
Yeah, for sure. What was the last thing that you learned?
Alongside my main work, I'm doing a master's at the moment in creative music production. So I wanted to get myself in the same space as other like-minded people, different types of creatives for a while. And there was also quite a lot at the institution I'm at, the ICMP, there's a lot of international students as well. And I really was excited about the prospect of being around people from different ages, different backgrounds, different kind of, but with a common theme of music and music production. So in terms of learning, it's been kind of wild because, I mean, we've just started a new module and one of our tutors is a Grammy award-winning producer. So it's like a lot of his technical expertise is incredible. So we've been learning a lot about kind of frequencies, frequency responses, the science behind stuff, how to set up a room so that you can hear frequencies correctly, and how the human ear works and how that changes over time and stuff. So a lot of kind of in-depth underlying knowledge to help us with the main task, I guess, is the answer to that.
Yeah, nice. Okay. That sounds super interesting, actually. Like being in a room of like-minded people, creatives, and actually having somebody teach you where you genuinely learn a lot from. That in itself, I think, is a gift, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's particularly interesting with this. I mean, all the tutors have been fantastic for all the modules, but the interesting thing about working in this module approach is the different tutors have a different personality. And what was interesting about this guy, his name's James, he's from America. He warned us that he's for efficiency, he'll be very direct in his critique. And he was kind of very adamant to be like, don't take it personally. It's literally for speed. It's for me to tell you, like, this is an issue, we'll fix it together. And so it was kind of reassuring, but also it was quite interesting because compared to some other people, I'm glad he said that, because I don't think I'd have been prepared for that level of directness, if that makes sense. And yeah, and I think in those moments, especially when you feel a little bit vulnerable and you're trying to sort of improve at something, I think you can. I sort of like to think of myself as someone who doesn't have much of an ego, but you realize you do, because it's the ego bruise that happens first. And the critique, I think that's when professional critique can feel personal, even when it's delivered absolutely correctly. Obviously sometimes people deliver things wrong and it does come across like a personal attack, and you have to deal with that as well. But I think in this case, some of the things he was saying, I was kind of, if he hadn't have already prepared us for it, I might have felt it was a little bit personal, even though it's not at all. It's just literally, this is a problem, we'll fix it, and that's how I need to see it. And it's kind of interesting to reflect on, oh, okay, I do have a bit of an ego. I need to kind of learn how to drop that, or adapt it, or react in an appropriate manner to it, and actually reflect and take a minute.
Yeah, I think that's like an interesting thing, because we all have an ego, don't we? We all have an ego, and it plays a part, doesn't it? It's there to keep us safe, and it's doing a good job. But when it's not in check, I think it can cause issues. So, like, you notice that when you get the critique, there's a moment where your ego would naturally feel bruised. But the fact that he kind of prepared you up front to say, this is my style, perhaps helped to. So I was thinking, like, does that alone help that process? Or is there anything else that you do in terms of mindset or how you receive that feedback? Because I think what we're talking about is quite interesting, isn't it? Like learning something that you're passionate about, putting yourself in spaces to improve yourself and grow. But it's really daunting to do that. It could be anything, whatever you're learning. For me, I hate being on camera. Like the idea of even doing this was like actually made me a bit sick until I thought, well, I'm just going to do it. It doesn't matter how bad it is. And if you don't like it, don't mod. Exactly. That was my theory. But yeah, I'm wondering, you're learning, you're pushing yourself. What do you do to cultivate that mindset to help you in those moments that you feel vulnerable?
I think it's definitely, for me at least, and it's obviously an ongoing process. I think it's accepting the variables. So I think like there are certain days, like if I'm particularly tired or hungry, so when you reflect, you kind of go, oh, actually, some of these very human things, like a lack of sleep or feeling a bit hungry, or you're already a bit annoyed for some reason, something's inconvenienced you, is going to have an impact on how sometimes you receive information. And I think especially when you're feeling vulnerable, the kind of first instinct for your self-protection can be to almost be protective. So if someone's like, oh, that bit sounds rubbish, or this happened that was wrong, every bit of my first reaction wants to be either kind of, no, it's not, or why is that? And you kind of have to go, okay, how am I actually feeling? Take a minute to process this and reflect it. If that's still how I feel in a minute, what's the appropriate way to frame that? But I think in this, again, I'm going to sound terribly old and fuddy-duddy here, but like in this kind of world where almost instant reaction and response is the go-to, I think what I would like to think I'm learning through a process of reflection and trying to work on it is that we don't have to instantly respond all the time. We can have a little think about, okay, I've received this, I feel like this because of it. Firstly, is it right? Like obviously if it comes from someone you respect or someone with a lot of expertise, the probability is it is. In other scenarios, it's kind of like, actually, is the person onto something? Have they got a point? Even if I don't necessarily like how they deliver it. And then it's kind of taking that moment. But I definitely think it's think about your role in a conversation or your role in a process as well as the other person's. I think.
Yeah, that feels like a good exercise of EQ and like just presence, really, because every day, generally, people react, don't we? We're built like that. We're emotional beings. So whatever it could be, whether you hear something, someone says something to you, whatever it is, you have a thought. As soon as you have a stimulus, you've got a thought. That thought creates an emotion. The emotion then affects your behavior, and that cycle is so in like deeply intertwined. We don't often stop to be able to notice our thoughts, let alone tune into the feeling, or have a minute to think about how are we acting. And it's a real skill when you can practice that, and it doesn't happen all the time. But the more you practice, I think the easier it gets to be more of an observer in your own experience.
Yeah, definitely. And it's trying to give yourself the space to do that and understand you're not always going to get it right as well. And in other scenarios, like even business stuff, I mean, obviously when I'm talking about kind of music, but even in kind of business, when I'm thinking about it, it's very easy to take everything in a vacuum and kind of feel like, think about your own pressures and your own, and sometimes people will ask things that are boundary pushing or unreasonable of you. So I'm not suggesting, don't have boundaries or anything, but sometimes it's kind of acknowledging, well, actually, they're on what pressure are they under? What scenario are they in? I think it's very easy to be reactive, and that's framed always from your own experience and your own pressures and your own feelings. But I think sometimes it's that kind of classic thing, like I always laugh, the sort of things that, your mum tells you about, if the shoe was on the other foot, and the kind of moral lessons that are very easy to forget as you get into adulthood and associate as kind of a childlike thing. But actually, if you apply those lessons to your adulthood, it can have a real benefit, because sometimes just acknowledging that someone else is under pressure, you can make a more meaningful connection with them as well. Because if you build a relationship over time, you can also say to that person, is everything like okay? What's going on? Like, is something happening to you? Because there tends to be a reason why people are asking certain things, especially if they feel out of left field, So it's trying to work on that. And I like to build those relationships anyway, because I think it helps me understand people better and helps me hopefully be a little bit more patient. It's a practice, and I definitely don't always achieve it correctly. I'm the first to admit that it's kind of hard.
Well, I'm definitely somebody that tries to look beyond the emotion or the reaction that I receive from somebody else. I think it's important when you're building any sort of relationship, whether it's at home or at work, if you can take a minute to understand what's driving somebody else's behavior, what pressure are they under, what's motivating it. Is it fear? Is it worry? Whatever it could be. But then I also think, and this is something that I'm learning more recently, that on one hand, I think it's a balance. One hand, there is something about kind of having that perspective acknowledging it and then seeking to make a more meaningful connection. But I think there is also something around, I saw the words, or I heard the words toxic empathy. I think I must have seen it in a post somewhere and I was like, oh my God, maybe that's me, where you completely think, well, that's happening because of X, Y, and Z. And that's happening because of all of these other reasons. And so I understand it, and you kind of provide leeway, or you tolerate more than you would normally. So I think there is something about creating this balance between having the empathy and the understanding, but also knowing your own boundaries and being quite clear of what you tolerate and what you don't tolerate. And I think that's an interesting dance to have, that I'm continuously having as someone who's quite empathetic and having to establish and learn boundaries continuously. Like, it's quite a challenge.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, because I think, again, it's a challenge that, at least for me, feels sometimes personal, because you almost associate it with the kind of more grandiose topic of, am I a good person? One thing I've had to learn over time, and I've learned a lot, particularly from other people and really like positive experiences around me, is that not everything's a problem to fix as well. Because I think sometimes you get in that scenario where you're trying to show empathy, you're trying to show interest, you're trying to show that you want to help someone, and you can fall into that trap of then trying to fix the problem for them. And maybe that's not what they want at all, or maybe that's actually also not going to help them. But you sort of accidentally forget, like, say, a boundary or a position in a relationship. I think it is a constant battle, or not battle, but like you say, dance was a good phrase, in terms of like constantly thinking about it and reflecting on how to do it effectively, but also where that boundary is, both for myself and for the other person.
So you said at the start that when I asked you what you wanted to talk about, you were talking about sort of almost creating the space for personal growth, even if it's away from what you do day to day. How different is what you're learning to the stuff that you do day to day? Is there a big gap?
Yeah, definitely. So I do account management for a web application firm, basically, for my day to day, which is great. And again, it's, all relationships, and I really enjoy that. And it's a lot of organization and time management and stuff. And it is, there's a lot of transferable skills that actually do help, particularly in creative spheres, because sometimes the stereotype about certain groups of musicians perhaps needing help I think it's fair to say some don't, but they are definitely very different kind of spheres. And that was one of the drivers for it. I got to a point where I thought, okay, I've been doing this, I'm comfortable. It's not that I don't enjoy my job necessarily, but it's more that I was like, what is important to me? What matters to me? What growth matters to me? What makes me feel like I want to go forward? Because I think it's very easy, especially as you get older, to kind of, we're busy, personal lives and all that kind of thing. But I want to keep developing. I don't want to kind of be stagnant and then in 20 years' time go, I wish I did this, I wish I did that. I want to learn these things, develop these things that are related to topics that are important to me, or pursuits that I'm passionate about, and see what I can learn and apply from them in other areas of my life as well. Like, especially the thread of relationships is such a big one in terms of, in business, it's obviously knowing how to talk to people. It's, time management and organization and delivery. And there is an element of delivery in the creative stuff, particularly with production, but it's also about making artists feel comfortable, making them feel empowered, making them feel like they're in a studio space, they can do their thing. And if they want to try something, they've got the freedom to try it and the encouragement to try it, and to try and remove the pressure from that situation, particularly where money's involved. I think that's kind of a really key skill. People kind of get scared because they're like, oh, I've paid X amount for a studio day and I need to get this done. And it's kind of going, we will get it done. But if you want to try this, like, I want to see what your ideas are. And if you want any feedback from me, again, that's another boundary. Some people kind of want some feedback or want me to present an idea. Some people just want me to let them fly. And it's knowing where the boundary is or where the line is on those relationships. And that's something that's carried over into business as well, is trying to work that out.
Yeah, it's like any relationship, isn't it, really? Like, contracting's a bit of an ugly word, but what I mean by that is it's quite a powerful thing to almost establish how that other person wants you or needs you to show up, and what you can or can't do for them. And you decide that at the start. So whether that's in a meeting, or with an artist, or with a client, or a boss, being really clear on what is it that they need, what is it that I need, and how do we help each other to get to that mutual outcome. I think it's important. And I don't think we ever have those conversations, really, not explicitly and not enough. Usually we're guessing, we're reading the other person, assuming we think we know, making assumptions, making some judgments, and then doing our best to kind of read the room. And I think often people, when they do that, they can do it pretty well. But sometimes when you ask the question explicitly, what is it that you need from me, you'll get an answer that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a huge, I think that's a huge thing, isn't it? It's kind of like showing up how others need you to show up, and sometimes how showing up for yourself as well, like even in kind of different scenarios, it's kind of, to use a sort of physical, I guess, analogy, it's kind of like going to the gym. Some days you'll turn up and you'll have a lot more energy than other days, and so you sort of need to listen to how you feel in your body and how safe a particular thing is. And I think it's the same, sometimes those conversations are hard to have with ourselves as well, because you don't want to necessarily admit what might appear. So sometimes it's kind of, checking that scenario, and like, what do you need from me is a fantastic question to ask people, especially in relationships. I think I've fallen into the trap of making assumptions that perhaps weren't correct in the past, and it's all a learning experience, and sometimes just having the honest conversation, because you're right, I don't think people have the conversation explicitly enough in a lot of scenarios. And while we're quite intuitive, and that's quite good, you can possibly save quite a lot of time, especially if you're in a scenario where the kind of classic time is money applies. You could probably make your life a lot easier by having the explicit conversation earlier on,
Yeah, definitely. And another thing that you said was, there's one thing asking somebody else, which actually I've been doing quite recently, even in my own household with my husband, because I make assumptions, he makes assumptions, and we're both a bit confused about what's happening. There's one thing asking somebody else about what it is that you need. There's something else about being able to identify your own needs. I know I'm not always great at that. Then there's something about being able to express them. So you might know them, but you might feel it's a bit rude or selfish or whatever it might be. Like, you might perceive it in a negative way to express that fully, to honor your own needs. So with that sort of train of thought, if I was to say, in your sort of quest with your music and your music production, what do you need to allow yourself to fly?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, I suppose the shortest answer I could give would probably be to get out of my own way. I think that there are a lot of times when, particularly if something's tied into kind of personal identity to a degree and things that I'm really passionate about, it's very easy to be comparative and be like, oh, it's not as good as whatever I admire, or to be like, oh, I don't think that idea is going to work before I've even given it a try. And I think sometimes see the idea through and accept that not every idea is going to be a good idea, but there might be something you can learn or something you can use, something you can take forward. And I think I've been very, particularly music wise, I've been stereotypical of the last few years, where before sort of doing the masters, and it's one of the reasons I really wanted to do it, in not finishing things. I had like a lot of starts of ideas that I was excited about for a short period of time, and then they kind of like dwelled into the hard drive on the computer or the voice notes on my phone, or whatever it may be. And I think sometimes it's just getting out of my way and stop questioning myself, and just kind of allow my creative ideas to happen, and then either mold them into shape. It's kind of like, I put an idea onto the plate, allow it to take some sort of shape,
Yeah.
and then hopefully develop the expertise to turn it, then go, oh, that looks more like a vase, and then turn it into a vase, rather than go, I'm going to make the best vase in the world, and then halfway through be like, oh, it's not very good. And I sort of have that visual when I'm doing it, to try and be like, it's just the clay right now, it's moldable, it's something that can sort of happen, and try to allow myself to do that, because I think I've stopped myself far too early, far too often, and it's made me not as productive as I should be. And it's probably denied me a lot of learning and a lot of good experience, and a lot of bad experience that I'll also learn from. So it's trying to just allow those things to happen. So I definitely think getting out my own way is a big theme as I've got older to learn from and improve from, because I've been guilty of that for sure.
Yeah, I can relate to a lot of that, really. I also have thousands of notes in my phone and stuff that I start. I call myself an idea factory, because I have loads of ideas, but then I get stuck because I either think myself out of them, or I've kind of forgotten about them. And so I needed, partly just to push through some of the fear, to get out of my own way, or a system, because I found that the front part, I think, if you're creative, you enjoy that creative process, the front part is quite exciting, like coming up with the ideas or having the big vision. Like, my brain works like that. But then I'm not what I call a finisher completer, somebody that's in the detail. I recently learned about myself that if I find something difficult, it's easier for me to say, oh, well, I'll outsource it, or I just won't bother. I'll go find the path of least resistance, which I'm not sure is a great trait because sometimes it's efficient.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I realized that sometimes I would just leave things, maybe not persevere enough. So I had to really hold a mirror up and then think, okay, what's the thing I find difficult? What do I need to learn about it? And then how do I take that somewhere? So when you were talking about the pottery wheel, it made me think, I love that idea of like you throw some clay down, doesn't matter what size, shape, whatever. It starts to take some sort of shape. And you're not seeking to create like the perfect vase, but you're going to create something. I guess my question is, with that sort of analogy and that sort of thinking in your mind, have you found yourself being able to create vases, even if they're ugly?
Yeah, it's definitely helped me just see an idea through. It's definitely it's a silly visual that kind of stops me stopping, for want of a better phrase. It just kind of, I go, okay, I'll just put something down. You know, in the case of obviously music, I'll record something, but I've sort of applied it to other areas as well, where it's like, how can I break this? Again, it's another classic cliche, but breaking things down into smaller chunks. So rather than being, you know, I'm going to do this whole thing, it's like, okay, like musically, it's like, let's just record the guitar idea. And then even if I sit on that for a day, then I'll set another task to be like, let's find a complementary idea for that guitar, whether it's another guitar line or a bass line or some drums, guitar piece on my phone, and it starts becoming a song. And then that gets me re-excited. So at the point when I'm kind of like, oh, actually, I found something, or I've been incredibly frustrated and it's taken a while, but then I'll leave it and I'll do another one and then come back to it fresh or whatever. But I found that I've been finishing a lot more ideas and progressing a lot more on a lot more ideas, and finding those points of like re-excitement to go, okay, now I'm starting to see a shape that I recognize. And even if I finish it and it's still not good, I'll maybe then take and rework it. But because something exists, I can then see a different vision for it, rather than it just being this big topic that's a bit too sort of open. And again, even in sometimes in business terms, it's kind of, you know, just do a small portion of it and kind of see something. And in the terms of creative writing, one of my old tutors years ago used to say, get it written and then get it right. And I thought that's such a good, succinct phrase for just put something down. And again, it's sort of a very similar idea. Then a shape starts to exist. And even if you have to do a lot of editing or reuse it, or it just inspires a better idea, it's achieved the purpose.
Yeah.
You know, but I think I'd always struggled. I think, again, in business and in a lot of other things, I think I'd focused sometimes too much on the output and forgot that the process is a huge part of that. And I think, you know, because again, a lot of industries are very output driven and output judged, and that's fine. That is what it is. I sort of sometimes forget that the actual real stuff happens in the process. The real growth, the real development, the real learning is the bit that happens before that. And I was sort of very lucky to have one of the tutors last year, a lady named Polly. Her artist name is Art School Girlfriend, and she was talking about process, and she showed us some of her process for her creating songs. And she's a genius, but some of the things she was doing, and it was the process was the joy. Like, she went and captured sounds of different rivers as she went for walks around the country and stuff, and it was all this incredible idea. And it really made me think, actually, yeah, she's really showing me the value of the process. Sometimes I was accidentally seeing the process as the arduous slog to get to the gold at the end of the rainbow, and that's just not true. The joy of the rainbow is the thing I've tried to learn.
Yeah, no, I think that's quite an important thing, really, what you're saying, because I'm thinking about things that I'm doing at the moment that I'll use this as an example. I said at the start, you know, before we started filming, I was like, it's really, really rough and ready. But before, I had no idea how to like edit something, to stitch it together, how to like cut out filler words, all this kind of stuff. And I've taken a bit of time. And of course, like what I'm creating, it's really not perfect. I'm sure somebody is listening and they've got some ideas about how to improve it. We're all ears. But there is definitely something about the process of learning and actually taking yourself through that and seeing the process as something that is quite rewarding in a way, because I've noticed like this is the first time there's something that I found extremely difficult. And rather than throw it to one side, I've persevered a bit. I've noticed the things that I don't like. I've noticed the things that I have liked. I can see what's getting better, but it's quite an interesting journey. And I think the idea of noticing, just even going outside, listening to, just putting yourself outside your comfort zone, really, like looking for inspiration externally. Now, that's another interesting thing. So talking about the artists that you mentioned, like listening to sounds, listening to the river, listening to things that she can hear, that forms inspiration. You know, like here I'm making or trying to have conversations with people that I just find interesting, but conversations happen everywhere. And I think there's a lot to be said about having your eyes and ears like wide open and taking that in, because you can learn from that even when you're not thinking that's the moment for your learning, if you know what I mean.
100%. Yeah, I think it's such a huge thing, because I think being aware of those things, and even, you know, you can learn from it. You can also find humor from it. I'm always fascinated by how, you know, every interaction is completely unique, particularly when the two people don't know each other. And I often find myself wondering whether how if you picked those two people up from where they met, so like something might be like an awkward interaction on the tube, for example, and I'm like, I wonder if you pick those two people up and you put them at a sports stadium or a concert hall or a church, like how would that conversation, what would it be, the same type of conversation, or would where they are impact the actual first interaction? Like, and I think I have these sort of little inquisitive things that I find kind of fun to, you know, pass the time on a long tube journey or whatever. But I kind of, because again, I just find the uniqueness in interaction and how we interact with space like really fascinating anyway, and how it influences not only art but just how we behave in a scenario and our intuition. You know, that I think everyone has that degree of how comfortable you feel in a space in general, whether that's because you're somewhere where there's something happening that you're interested in, or whether it's sometimes it's fascinating to kind of listen to yourself on those things. And like you said about your process for this, it's incredible. And I think taking pride, trying to take stock in the idea that like you've learned something, even if it's small, like even if it's that you got a little bit faster at editing, or you did something in the editing that you like the look of better than before, or the sound of. It's kind of trying to take the joy in those moments. And that's something that I couldn't do, or I didn't know yesterday. You know, it's taking those small wins. It's taking that idea to kind of, because I think we can sort of, when you're so focused on just the output, you can miss the joy in that, and you can miss the joy of progression, you know, in that kind of, to use a gym analogy, it's not like Popeye. No one just turns up, lifts a couple of weights and turns into a muscle back. You know, there's small things along the way and habits and systems to get those people that are really good in those scenarios there, and it's trying to acknowledge and find the joy in that, because otherwise it's just, you know, seen as a slog to an output, and the chances are you'll probably change the output in your head at some point in the process anyway, so then you're denying yourself for even longer. I think it's trying to find, you know, and it's a lot easier to say than do, I'm saying it, but there are still times when I'm in a process and I'm frustrated, obviously, but it's, you know, it's trying to find the joy every step of the way that you can in that process, because you'll then really, I think, reflect a lot more on what you've learned, what you liked, what you didn't like, and take more from it into the next thing that you do.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
If I was going to give you my last question, if I was going to say to you, if somebody's listening to our conversation and you wanted to leave them with a thought, what would it be?
But again, as cheesy as it is, believe, not necessarily just believe in yourself, but believe yourself as well. I think if you listen to your own intuition, your own idea, your own, it's not necessarily even about believing in yourself, it's just believing what you tell yourself, and then having a think about that, because I think that's such an important, I think so many ideas get lost because we believe comparisons or ideas over our own ideas. And I think it's just kind of believe your own feelings, your own self, and just get that idea or that thought or that whatever it is out there, because I think then more great things will exist in the world.
I really have enjoyed our chat. Thank you so much.
So I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's really great to chat to you.